Question 4, Joe Fitzpatrick.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on the report by the Scottish Digital Network that a new television network for Scotland should be created and funded from the licence fee.
First Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government welcomes the Digital Network panel report, agrees with the central recommendation that a new digital network for Scotland should be established and funded from the television licence fee. There already has been in this chamber cross-party consensus in support of the Scottish Digital Network. I hope we can build on that unity to press the UK Government to implement the panel's recommendations as a Parliament. Now, in response to the UK Government's recently...
Order. I'm sorry, First Minister. If members at the back of the chamber wish to have debates, could they do so outside this chamber, please?
In response to the UK Government's recently published Local Media Action Plan, the Scottish Government will argue that a Scottish digital network with scopes for local opt-outs is the best way of delivering more localised broadcasting and the benefits this will bring for viewers and the creative industries in Scotland.
Joe Fitzpatrick.
Minister, for the answer. At 2% of the licence fee, the proposals for a Scottish digital channel should be taken seriously by the BBC. The Presiding Officer, members from across the chamber have been highlighting the need for a dedicated Scottish 6 news bulletin without success for a number of years. Would the First Minister agree that a new dedicated digital television channel for Scotland could bring a Scottish 6, a Scottish news channel, one step closer?
Minister.
Yes, I do. And let me acknowledge in supporting that this is an idea which has had cross-party support. I'm looking for the Conservatives media spokesperson. I don't know if he's here today, but nonetheless, it's in Malawi. And there was no disrespect intended, because I was going to say that he was Ted Brocklebank was one of the first people to bring forward this idea with his experience in broadcasting. I do think it's an idea whose time has come. I do think we should continue to unite as a Parliament to press this issue, and I think we should be extremely grateful to the network panel headed by Blair Jenkins, and the former chair, of course, of the Scottish Broadcasting Commission, who have produced such an excellent, thoughtful report, which hopefully this chamber can unite behind.
Polly McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister is aware that Labour has supported the idea of investing in growing the Scottish broadcasting industry and a Scottish digital channel, provided that it is not at the expense of existing Scottish output and it is a channel of quality. Given the BBC has already reached agreement on how the licence fee would be used last October, how does the First Minister propose to open up those talks, given the Tory Liberal coalition government have imposed new costs on the BBC, including £340 million for the cost of the World Service, and have frozen the licence fee for the next 6 years? I presume we are not proposing to reduce BBC Scotland's budget in that argument.
First Minister.
Well, as Polly McNeill knows, and I think has acknowledged and supported in previous discussions and debates, that if you look at the spending licence fee in Scotland and the spending on BBC Scotland, and indeed the Scottish contribution to the network, which is still way under population share, then I don't think it's unreasonable for the network panel, for the digital panel, to suggest something that would cost 2% of the licence fee as a proposal. Now, if the discussion is closed until 2017, then the report, of course, proposed that a bridge funding might be provided from the proceeds of auctioning the cleared spectrum after the digital switchover in 2012. So the report anticipated that we might get a shut door from Westminster on the basis that agreement had been reached in 2017, and therefore proposed an alternative funding mechanism. So with that in mind, and given the strength behind the report, given the broad welcome it's received across the media and cultural industries in Scotland, then I do hope we can continue our unity as a Parliament, which is our best possible outcome in terms of achieving what we all want to see in Scotland.
Question 5, Richard Baker.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on the Violence Reduction Unit's report that 4,783 domestic violence incidents were logged by police forces during December 2010.
First Minister.
Well, domestic abuse is completely unacceptable. This Government continues to work closely with all key partners, including the police, to ensure that perpetrators are held to account and victims have access to appropriate support. We know that domestic abuse is underreported. That's why the Violence Reduction Unit campaigns annually to encourage and increase reporting. As part of this campaign, Scottish police forces have introduced a number of measures to combat the most serious offenders, including GPS tracking and indeed third-party reporting. We will continue to tackle this issue head-on, with funding of over £11 million proposed for 2011-12. That is 40% higher than the budget in 2006-07.
Richard Baker.
Will the First Minister agree that these figures show the need for continued support for those groups who are doing excellent work to deal with this serious and stubborn problem of domestic abuse in Scotland? And given that the issue of sentencing for these offences is crucial to the overall approach, what consideration has been given to building on the success of the Domestic Abuse Court in Glasgow, established in the last Parliament, and developing similar approaches in other parts of the country?
First Minister.
Well, the route that we've chosen in terms of distributing the increased funding, the 40% increase in funding to tackle this serious issue, is to make sure that a variety of support services and groups are assisted directly. £2 million to fund Assist, for example, 73 projects funded under Violence Against Women funding stream, many of which address directly the domestic abuse issue. 3-year funding for specialist children's services through the Women's Aid Fund, and all, of course, the equality budget from 2011-12, for which Violence Against Women funding is allocated, has been retained at its 2010-11 level, despite the £1,300 million of cutbacks that John Swinney has had to accommodate in the Scottish budget. I think these statistics and the track record say that this is a highest priority for this government, and I hope it's a priority that's shared by the entire chamber.
Robert Brown.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It's a particular worry, I think, that over half of domestic abuse victims have previously suffered abuse already. There are good episodes, such as the Domestic Abuse Task Force established by Strathclyde, which targets the more persistent offenders. But I wonder if the First Minister can cast any further light on what the government is able to do across Scotland to get into this particular intractable problem of repeat offenders.
Well, a range of the funding streams that are support to look at that issue in particular. We have obviously a serious problem, and the statistics bear that out. We've had as a government Robert Brown's support across a range of justice issues which we can now see are yielding results in terms of the 30-year low in recorded crime in Scotland. But there are still areas where there is much to do. And I think violence and domestic abuse and violence against women in particular is one of these areas. And I hope that Robert Brown will acknowledge that the variety of projects and funding streams that are being introduced recognise the seriousness of the issue, just as the reporting of it now indicates that we now understand the problem better and are seeking to address it in the most serious way.
Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the First Minister if he is aware of concerns expressed by Scottish Women Aid regarding the effect alcohol has on domestic violence, including the perception that being drunk can somehow be seen as an excuse for committing these appalling crimes, and that violence is actually likely to be more severe where the perpetrator is drunk? Does the First Minister agree that it is imperative, and I say imperative, that we tackle and reduce the overconsumption of alcohol if we are to see a serious reduction in these terrible figures?
Yes, I do agree with that. Alcohol is not an excuse for any crime, domestic abuse or any other crime, and can never be considered so. But we as a Parliament, we as a society must recognise that the role of alcohol in a range of crimes is hugely significant in Scotland. And that is why this Parliament, sooner rather than later, are going to have to tackle the booze culture in Scotland head-on, which would result in remarkable improvements in the social fabric of Scotland in this area and in many others.
Question 6, Jeremy Purvis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government considers that the choices made in its draft budget for 2011-12 represent fair support for college students.
First Minister.
Yes, I do. The draft budget, as Jeremy Purvis knows, will ensure that not a single student place at college or university will be lost, despite the savage cut in Scotland's budget imposed by the Liberal and Tory UK Government. The draft budget also protects funding for student support, with a guarantee that no student will receive less living support next year than they do this year. We have provided record funding of £84 million for student support in the current academic year. The draft budget maintains that for 2011-12. That is a 25% increase over the period of this administration.
Jeremy Purvis.
the First Minister for his reply. I met with 3 students on Monday who are in receipt of bursaries that allows them to get an opportunity to be at college. And in my discussions with John Swinney about the draft budget, we've indicated that we will work with the Government to tackle what is a £1.7 million real terms reduction in the bursary budget for those students. Given that part of the bonuses that were paid out, as Tavish Scott indicated to Scottish Water over the last year of £4.25 million, is that fair arithmetic?
First Minister.
The arithmetic that counts in this is a 7.5% increase in terms of number of places at college and the 25% increase in the student support budget. We always listen to the students and others in society with a case. We listen, for example, in preserving the educational maintenance allowance, which has been cancelled by his colleagues south of the border, but which helps tens of thousands of people from poorer backgrounds in Scotland to maintain their place in education. We listen, for example, in refusing to go down the road, as pursued by his colleagues south of the border, of £9,000 tuition fees. And we listened also in not cutting college funding by 25% or university funding by 40% over the review period. That's why we've got a Scottish Government protecting the rights of Scottish students, and that is acknowledged. And I have to say to Jeremy Purvis, I think there's going to be some considerable rearrangement of the Liberal Democrat position before a single student in this country will be voting for his party at the coming election.
That concludes questions to the First Minister. I suspend this